I need a subject. What is your expectation of what a trance experience would be like for you?
To be able to separate my problems and not make them all come in at once. To get rid of some of my fears.
All in the space of 5 minutes.
You can take 3 minutes if you like.
You heard me say earlier I responded to a challenge. What is your trance experience, Melody?
In hypnosis or trance? None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. And how were you doing here in the last couple of days during the practice sessions?
I find it very fascinating, very interesting, and hope that I'd be able to help myself.
And how did you do as subject?
To help myself, I really don't understand enough about it.
Uh-huh. But just in terms of getting into the trance, how was that for you when you were the subject in the
They
practice?
couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it?
No.
Tell me what happened.
I heard other voices more predominantly than the people who were working with me. And I just felt the fear and the void and everything still within me.
The fear and the void associated with the idea of going into a trance,
No.
associated with some other things that are going on?
That's right.
Okay. Are you a good visualizer?
Not particularly. I'm always willing to try.
You're always going to try. Can you describe your car to me?
Yes.
Would you?
Dark maroon, with about 6 dents due to carts in the parking lot.
Okay. All right.
And it's halfway dirty right now. The windows are halfway dirty because of the rain. I haven't been able to wash it.
Uh-huh. So it's sort of difficult to get a clear view when the windows are dirty, isn't it?
Sure.
For me, when my windows in my car are dirty, I get some sense of being confined and having things come in on me.
That's right.
Is that your experience?
That's my experience with my head. It just seems like it's pressing in on me. My eyes I have a problem with my eyes. Everything seems to be pressing in and compressing.
Like the dents from other people's what?
From the problems that are either I'm enlarging upon or not being able to push them aside.
Mm-hmm. And sort of begging for your attention in some way, it sounds like.
Anxieties and the fears and everything just stayed with me instead of dissipating.
Would you be willing to take a risk that might feel worse before it felt better?
Hell no.
I want you to think about it very carefully.
I suppose it would depend upon the time element.
How long it lasted, you mean? Okay, well,
Because it's almost a year now of this lasting, and that's about
well,
all.
I'm speaking in terms of minutes.
Oh, minutes?
Yeah.
You have a soft chance there.
Would you? Okay. All right. Would you put your hands on your thigh or the chair? Either way is comfortable for you. Just so they're not touching each other. Is that a comfortable position?
Yes.
Close your eyes. What I'd like you to do is just begin to describe to me what you're feeling right now in as much detail as you can.
I hear your voice, and I feel the presence of about 100 people here.
Okay.
I feel their friendliness.
Okay.
I feel that they want to know what my problems are. Maybe you can help them.
All right.
And they're hoping, I feel that they're hoping that you can help me.
Uh-huh. And what else is going on? What about the pressure and the feeling of the windows being uncleaned and things coming in?
Right now I don't feel that. When I'm around people, I don't feel all those things.
Mm-hmm. All right. Would you be willing, as I count from 1 to 5, to allow those feelings to come over you, the ones that you haven't been feeling, the ones you're afraid of feeling?
Yes.
All right. And as you feel them increasing, just let me know through a nod of your head that that's actually what's happening, okay? And we'll start with 1. And perhaps remembering times in which you felt those feelings. And 2. And no matter how deeply absorbed in those thoughts and feelings you become, I want you to remain in touch with this voice and not need to be in touch with anything outside of you but this voice. and 3. And 4, remembering times and places in which you felt those sensations, those thoughts, those ideas, those feelings. And 5. And Millie, I want you to know that you can speak with me without needing to look at me. You can speak with me without disturbing the state you find your body to be in. And even the sound of your own voice will enhance all of this. And what I'm curious to know is, if those sensations we spoke of a moment ago were 0 on a scale of 1 to 10, where are they now?
About 2.
About 2. And would you be willing to let them go to 3?
Yes.
Let me know when they're at 3.
No, I can't push up.
I want you to try hard, Millie. Unable to. A little bit past 2.
Your voice is soothing enough to sort of push those thoughts away.
It'd be terrible if my voice were to follow you when you left here. In fact, it might be an interesting experience for you when you tried to think about these things and found them coming on to you, that you would remember this voice and the sense of soothing that it produced. And it'd be more interesting perhaps even than that to not only remember the voice, but the concerned interest of 100 people. Now, as you continue to consider the concerned interest of 100 people and the soothing sound of the voice, I want you to try very hard to get those sensations to go to 3. And tell me what's happening.
Trying hard.
And what's happening?
Now they're sort of static.
They're sort of static. They wouldn't be decreasing, would they?
No, they're staying about 2. They're still there. I know what they are.
All right. And 2 out of 10 is 20%.
That's right.
20% is acceptable?
Oh, if it would stay that far, that would be all right.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want you to think back now to a time in which they were especially bad. And just, I don't need to know that time, but just tell me when you're there.
Yes.
Okay. And tell me, as you think of that time, and as you think of the 100 concerned people in a room, and the soothing voice, where on a scale is it now?
About 3.
About 3. 3 is 30%. Is 30% tolerable?
That's tolerable.
It's tolerable. And would you, as an experiment, be willing to push it to 4?
Sure.
All right. Let me know when you get to 4, keeping in mind not only that scene, but also 100 concerned people and the soothing sound of this voice.
Well, it's awfully hard to push it up now.
It's awfully difficult to push it up.
In this situation.
Could
When
you-
I'm alone, I don't.
Okay. Perhaps you could imagine being alone. Even though this voice could intrude in that loneliness. And 100 concerned gazes might even, too, intrude in that loneliness.
You know, it just seems like there's a moat around it.
A motor?
Moat.
Moat around it. Around you.
Separating me from the problems.
Separating you from the problems. And are the faces on your side of the moat or the other side of the moat?
On the other side of the moat.
I wonder if you would be willing to construct a little bridge for us to come across and be with you.
Yes.
All right. And only as fast or as much as you want, because you might not want to have 100 visitors all at once, would you? But have some control over how fast they came into your awareness. Let me know when the bridge is constructed.
Bridge is there, and people are not there. The problems are rushing in.
The problems are rushing in. And where are you on that scale of 1 to 10?
I'm trying to put up my hand to stop it.
And where are you? At what number?
About 4.
About 4. And when you consider the soothing sound of this voice and 100 concerned faces, what happens?
The situation seems to become white.
White.
And come together.
And come together. White like a cloud, you mean?
White like white water.
Like white water. And that makes it difficult to be aware of the problems, does it?
Yes.
So perhaps what you would like to do is pick the bridge up again so that you don't need the whiteness there. And let me know when you've done that.
Yes.
All right. And once again, what's happening to the scale?
I'm still about 4. The mode is there, and it's pushed the problems back up with the bridge.
And could you be aware of the faces across the moat?
Well, they're not faces, they're problems. I can see the problems.
How about the 100 interested faces?
Oh, they're over to the side.
Okay, over to the side. Could you focus on some of those faces that seem the most friendly?
Sure.
All right. It would be terrible if those faces were to intrude in your loneliness, would it?
No.
It would not be terrible if those faces were to intrude in your loneliness.
No. I wouldn't consider them an intrusion.
You would not consider it an intrusion. Or the intrusion of this voice?
No.
Or the intrusion of the feelings you're having now?
The feelings I'm having now is just sort of I've placated the problems.
And the moat's up. Or the bridge is up.
Yes.
And on a scale of 10, where are you now?
Oh, I'm staying at about 4.
Would you be willing to let it go to 5 in order to let it go to 3?
Sure.
All right. Let me know when it gets to 5 and begins to work its way down to 3 on its own.
I successfully pushed it away, it seems like.
You weren't able to make it go to 5. Well, that's
Staying at about 4.
It's staying at about 4. I really want you to try and push it to 5. This is an interesting way to fail. I think this is the kind of failure that you could enjoy, isn't it?
The kind of what?
The kind of failure that you could enjoy?
Oh, yes.
And where is it now?
About 5.
About 5. All right. And do you think you could be successful at failing to push it to 6?
I'd try if it would help.
Why don't you try?
Well, it's coming close, but it's not really.
Not really at 6. Maybe it'd be better if you had a running start at it. What if you could bring it back down to 3 and take a running start toward 6?
Oh, yes. Pretty close back to 3.
Pretty close back to 3. Okay,
I don't get that anxiety feelings, and I don't get that.
Right, and that was closer to 5 and 6, I take it.
Yes.
Okay, so you're at 3 now. Could you take a running start at 6 and see if you could make it all the way to 6?
You know, I can still feel all the friendliness in your voice, and it just doesn't come rushing in.
It just doesn't come rushing in. And what would happen if, as we sit here now, you were to imagine that I was with you in your home? What would I be sitting in?
Probably a chair across from me.
What color is the chair?
Red.
What kind of chair is it? Is it a plush chair?
Small chair.
Small
something
chair.
That we're sitting in.
Something like these. And what would it be like to have me sitting in your living room with you?
Be a very friendly voice.
Be a friendly voice.
Trying to push all those thoughts away, just as you are now.
And where are they now on a scale of 1 to 10?
And we're back down to about 3.
We're back down to 3. All right. Now let's imagine that we're sitting in your living room. I'm sitting across from you, and those feelings are at about 3. And what happens? Would we have coffee or tea?
Possible.
It's possible. What kind of tea do you like, Millie?
Generally celestial of some kind.
Celestial seasonings. So we're having tea now in your living room. And where are you on the scale?
Oh, I can still feel those feelings halfway. It's not much beyond 3.
About a 3, about 30%. 30% is tolerable?
Well, it's better than the way it was.
Would you be willing to let me come into your dreams with you tonight?
Yes.
Okay. What I want you to do is I want you to simply pose the question internally, would it be all right for David to come into my dreams tonight, so that we could take the learnings from the stage here and bring them to home. I don't want you to think about that, but just think about the question and not the answer, and wait till there's an answer, and when you're aware of the answer, let me know.
I don't quite understand your question.
I'm asking you to pose the question internally, would it be all right for David to come into my dreams tonight so that we can take the learnings from the stage back to home? Wait for an answer from that part of your mind. When you think you know what it is, let me know. Have you already gotten it?
Yes.
And what was it? It was yes?
Yes.
The answer was yes. Okay. And where are you on the scale now?
That seems to be pushing back rather than forward.
Which back
toward 2.
Toward 2.
Seems to be blacking and sort of a void and there, instead of the problem staring me in the face, it seems to be like a blanket up on the blackboard in front of it.
Okay. There's just one more thing I'd like you to do tonight. In the back of the room is an order form for the tapes. It has my name on it. What I'd like you to promise me that you'll do tonight before you go to bed is fold it up 4 ways. That is, fold it twice so that it produces 4 sections. And what I want you to do is put it under your pillow to help you remember to dream.
Is that just the page on the tape?
Yeah, just the page.
Yes,
Okay, and are you willing to do that?
Yes.
Can you imagine doing that now?
Yes.
And where are you on the scale?
Just with the tapes and the problems are put and pushed to the side.
Very good. Okay. In a moment, I want you to take 1 or 2 or 3 deep breaths. When you do, come back into the room refreshed and relaxed and feel comfortable. Good. How long have you been up here? About?
Probably 5 minutes, 5, 6 minutes.
Probably 5 or 6 minutes. Okay. It's nice to lose track of time, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And some other things you didn't need.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Millie.
Tyou very much.
See you later. All right, I want to do just one more, and then I want to give you some practice time. Next person, just come on up. Switcheroo. Well, what makes you think you can go into a trance?
It's just a crazy idea I have.
Yeah? Well, what is your expectation?
Of trance?
Of what we're going to do?
That I'm going to have fun.
You're going to have fun. All right. So what would be the first sign that you were going into a trance, if in fact you were going into a trance?
My vision.
Okay. And what would you have to do to get your vision to do that?
Nothing. It's already started.
It's already started? All right. Would you, given that it makes me sort of uncomfortable for you to stare at me, would you prefer, I would prefer actually if you were to stare maybe at your hand or your knee or a point over there or something like that.
Which one would you prefer?
I don't care really, it's your choice.
Okay.
All right. You just find it.
I'm not good with choices.
You're not good with choices? All right. I have a better idea. Why don't you close your eyes and stare at your hand?
Close my eyes. Okay. Thank you. It makes it much easier.
Are you seeing it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I wonder if you could just in your mind's eye watch that hand begin to feel light. And as you're doing that, there's no real need to have to be in charge of those muscles, because those muscles have minds of their own, don't they? And they can let go at whatever rate you're comfortable letting go, and could enjoy having a playful experience and being able to let those muscles decide on their own just how and in what way they might like to release. And you're beginning to experience it now, aren't you? You can tell me what you're feeling. Go on.
Well, I'm having fun, but my arm doesn't want to do anything.
Can you watch it doing something without it having to do something?
Mm-hmm.
And what might it look like to you if it were beginning to lift?
Well, what I'm seeing is all my muscles yelling at me.
And what are they saying?
It's not words. It's more like you're going like this.
And what does that mean to you?
Leave me alone.
Oh? Well, let's leave them alone then. In fact, let's leave them so alone that they can sit in the chair by themselves.
Okay.
And where are you sitting?
Over there.
Over there. All right, that's very good. Now, you know that not everybody needs to relax completely to experience a trance, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And would it be acceptable for you to know that you're in a trance without needing to relax completely?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I wonder what kind of phenomena you might like to experience that would be a sign for you that you're in that trance.
Oh no, you just gave me another choice. I get overwhelmed when someone gives me such an open choice. Could you give me a few either-ors or something?
Sure.
Or a list or something?
A list? Well, let's see. It was sort of fun the other day when people looked at me and couldn't say their name. Maybe you'd like to experience that. Not your thing necessarily. All right. Well, we'll scratch that one.
I do that anyway, so it wouldn't prove anything.
You do that anyway? Well, I don't know, but you like the idea of being playful. Maybe it would be fun to remember a time that you were being playful that you hadn't thought of in a long time.
Thank you.
And where are you now?
I don't want to talk about it.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Would you be willing to become more deeply absorbed in it? And would it be all right for my voice to go with you without you needing to even know who's talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And you're very involved in it, are you?
Oh, yes.
Now, would it be an interesting experience for you at some point in your life when you were feeling blue to be willing and able to remember the same kinds of sensations you're having now?
I just went on tilt. Sure, yes. Okay.
All right. One day, perhaps, when you're feeling blue or a little bit down, you might find yourself going to the mirror and making eye contact with your own eyes, and suddenly remember sitting up here with me and remember the experience of going back and reliving whatever it is that you're reliving, and find that in spite of yourself, you couldn't feel down. That'd be an interesting experience, wouldn't it?
Can I do that every time?
You can do it as many times as you want to.
Okay.
All right. Now, it might be fun for you to not necessarily have to bring back the experience itself, but just the good, pleasurable feelings from the experience in the moment when you come back into your body and into the room. Do you think you could do that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I'm going to let you decide, because I know you hate decisions, to take 1 or 2 or 3 deep breaths and find yourself to be fully alert, back in your body, back in the room, and feeling comfortable. What a smile. How you do? How long have you been up here?
I don't know.
About? Several years.
At least. I don't know.
Confused about that. Anything you want to say about the experience?
Now my arm feels really light.
This one? Or this one? This one. It looks like it's kind of still back there to me. Is it?
No, that was the only thing that was here in the first place.
Everything else was back there.
Yeah. I keep getting confused.
It's okay. Sometimes great insight follows confusion.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you for coming up.
Thank you.
Now I want to suggest the way we practice that you form larger groups, that you form groups of about 8. And the way I'd like you to practice is in a circle. One person works on this one. After this person has been worked on, they work on this one, and this one. So you get a chance to observe perhaps more approaches. Now, keep in mind the whole thing. Pre-induction talk, assessment, for a type of induction, do the induction, and perhaps even begin to do some utilization work. Okay, let's talk a bit about self-hypnosis. Self-hypnosis for me is a paradox. The paradox is that if the idea of hypnosis is to distract the conscious mind so that the unconscious mind can do its thing, then the kind of self-awareness that one has to have to do self-hypnosis, that is, I'm doing this to myself, is sort of paradoxical to the intent of self-hypnosis. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, if the intent is not to be self-aware, but I have to be self-aware to do it, how does that work? So I'm not quite sure how it works, but I know that it works, so we can talk about that. With self-hypnosis in my own life, I've quit smoking, I lowered blood pressure, I was on medication for blood pressure at one point in my life. My blood pressure is now 110/67. I had when I was a kid, I had something called Osgood-Schlatter disease. It was a horrible thing. It's these calcium deposits that form on the knee. And it can be even crippling. And back in those days, I don't know how they treat it now, but back in those days, I got these god-awful cortisone shots. And you can, in some of my own therapy, the rage came up when I realized that if they had simply done hypnosis on me at that age, I wouldn't have had to endure this torture of these horrible needles, which made me needle phobic for many years, as you can imagine. Anyway, the needles were so bad that I begged not to have any more of them. And the doctor finally consented, saying, you know, we're driving him crazy, but I'm not going to do this anymore. And that was fine. In my mid-20s, when I was 26 years old, I started to limp and started to develop pain in this knee. And it was very bad. I mean, I could hardly walk for a period of several weeks. And it was just out of nowhere. And I thought, what is this? This is crazy. So I thought, well, there's something cooking here that I don't know about. And because I had some intuition about that, at least. And so I went into a trance and I asked for help. I just said, I need help with this, and I didn't know what I was looking for. And what came back was a scene in the doctor's office when I was 12 years old. The last day that I was supposed to get an injection, when the doctor said, we're not going to do this anymore because we're driving him crazy. I remembered a conversation that I must have heard at the time, clearly, but did not remember, where the doctor called my parents off to the side and said, look, we'll stop the injections, but I have some fear that in his mid-20s he'll go lame. And there it was. So, well, this is great. So I said, I don't need to respond to that anymore. And within a couple weeks it was gone and it hasn't come back. And now I run a lot. Let's talk about trance induction in a moment. Let's first talk about utilization. And I want to give you a continuum of utilization that goes from directive to non-directive, or from structured to non-structured. Let's start at this end of the continuum. This end of the continuum would be rote suggestion. Now, and I will use this with clients where I will write out, I have these little RX pads, you know, little prescription pads, and they say psychological recommendations. And on there, I will write auto-suggestions, affirmations, things like, I brought a few, you'll get copies of this if you want to buy the notes. I have no need to prove I'm good or better than others. Each experience is helping me to learn and grow as a person. Every day in every way I'm getting better and better. That's unique. I frequently imagine myself the way I want to be. I frequently imagine myself the way I want to be. I am learning I have a perfect right to my feelings. With each day that passes, I feel a greater feeling of personal safety, security, and well-being, etc. Then I will make them perhaps even more specific for that client. And I'll write these down in this RX pad, and I'll tell them to practice them. And on the highly directive side of this, the way they do that is I say, look at the list each day when you do your practice, and one or two of these will jump off the page at you, the ones that you're supposed to do that day. Intuitively, you'll know which ones they are. Then what I want you to do is I want you to go inside, and we'll talk about how to go inside in just a moment, but go inside and repeat them to yourself over and over and over again, and see, feel, hear, smell, and taste what it'd be like when you're doing it. Involve as many sensory systems as you can. And just imagine doing it, feeling it, seeing it, hearing it, as you say these things to yourself. So, if my suggestion is with each day I am realizing more and more I have a perfect right to my feelings, then what I would do is imagine myself in a variety of contexts in which that's been a problem for me, seeing, feeling, hearing, tasting, smelling myself, doing it well. And it's that simple. That's on the highly directive side. Let's just for a moment jump to the other side, highly non-directive side. And I want to tell you an experience of my own on that side. I live in a neighborhood, actually until next weekend, I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of barking dogs. And years ago, these dogs were, they still, actually lately they've been barking a little bit more, I guess because I'm getting ready to move, I'm hearing them again. But years ago, I was to the point where I was actually going to move, that these dogs were bothering me that much. And I was writing letters to the mayor and just really going kind of crazy about this. And of course, the more I tried not to listen to them, the more I heard them. So one day I was sitting outside in the sun, and I decided that I needed some help with this, that I couldn't just sell my house because of some dogs. And now we're on this non-directive side, so I simply went inside and said, I need some help with this. Okay? And here was my experience, and it was an amazing experience. The first thing that happened was I heard the dogs barking. Now, I was outside. It could very well have been that I actually heard them, but I don't know to this day if I heard them inside or outside. I really don't know, except there they were. And I felt all the feelings that I would normally feel. And I also became aware of an internal image that I'd been making that I hadn't even known that I'd been making about these dogs. And that was an image of a fierce-looking Doberman barking its head off with the owner standing behind it, sort of looking proud. Well, that would make anybody angry, and it certainly makes me angry. And I realized for a split second that that was the image that had been plaguing me. Dogs don't bother me that much. In fact, I love dogs. But the image would bother me because I thought the owners were being irresponsible. The next thing that happened, and this is all spontaneous, was that I heard the dogs again. And again, I don't know if they were inside or outside. I really don't. Probably inside. And then, but this time, it was a different image. I guess at that point, about 5 years before, we had to put our family dog to sleep, and we'd had her for 14 years, and it was one of the most significant objects of my growing up. And I love this dog, and I missed it terribly. So this time, when I heard the sound of the dogs, I saw Blondie, who was my dog. And it was a wonderful feeling for me to see Blondie and hear Blondie's bark. Now, I must tell you, shortly after this, I came out of the trance with amnesia, and none of this was consciously directed. I'd forgotten what I thought about. I did not remember this experience for many, many weeks, till one day I remembered exactly what I'm telling you now. But my experience was virtually overnight, the dogs didn't bother me anymore. In fact, the dogs didn't seem to bark. About a year later, I talked to a neighbor who had also complained about the dogs, and I said, isn't it wonderful the dogs aren't in the neighborhood anymore? She said, what do you mean? I've been hearing them every night, and I'm getting ready to report them. And they basically stayed away. This was, about 6-7 years ago. They basically stayed away until just recently when I decided I was going to move, and moved into a very quiet neighborhood, and now I'm hearing the dogs again. So, but it worked. So, and it was unconscious processes. It was just, give me an experience that will help me. It was the request. Let me tell you another experience of mine that is probably also on this end of the spectrum. Years ago, I reread Rudyard Kipling's book, Kim, which if you haven't read it, read it. It's a marvelous book and has a lot of hypnosis in it. One of the things that Kim would do at night to put himself to sleep was he would repeat his name like a mantra. He would say, Kim, I am Kim. Kim, I am Kim. Kim. And this would put him to sleep. I thought, well, I want to try that. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I thought instead of doing it to go to sleep, I'm going to go stand in front of a mirror and do that. My intention was to stand in front of the mirror. Now, of course, I'm on this end of the spectrum now, the directive end of the spectrum, and say, I am David. I am David, and just see what would happen. Okay, that was my intention. When I opened my mouth, that isn't what came out. What came out was, who am I? And it shocked me. Well, wait, I don't want to say that. I went to say again, I am David, and again the words came out, who am I? I thought, oh, well, okay, I'll go with it. So, moving on to this end of the spectrum. So, I caught my eyes in the mirror, and I just kept saying, who am I? Who am I? Well, as I was saying this, my peripheral vision shrank, everything in the room disappeared, and all I saw was a face floating in the mirror, which looked a little bit like me. And then I had the experience that it wasn't me talking anymore, but it was the face in the mirror talking, saying, who am I? And it was as though the face were asking me this question. And I answered. I said, well, you must be a helper or a therapist. And the face in the mirror said, yes. Oh, great. Now, I've used this face in the mirror as an internal advisor for years now. And I might add that the promises that I've made to this face in the mirror, I've never broken. For example, I promised this face in the mirror 5 years ago I'd quit smoking, and I did. I've never broken a promise to the face in the mirror. I've taken difficult cases to the face in the mirror and said things like, I don't know what to do, tell me what's going on, and the face in the mirror has told me things I haven't always wanted to hear. For example, I remember one family very well. I just couldn't click with them. And the face in the mirror said, it's very simple. The mother reminds you of your own mother, and you're afraid of her. It was a revelation. It made sense. I worked that through and finally got somewhere with the family. It wasn't an extraordinary case, but we did get somewhere. And that did clear the logjam. So it's become an internal advisor. And I have a tremendous amount of reverence for the face in the mirror. I don't just call it up for fun. I call it up when I'm really stuck. So that would be an auto-hypnotic experience on this non-directive side. I remember a humorous thing that happened one of the times I was visiting Erickson. There was a man who said, I just can't do self-hypnosis. And I try, and I can't. So Erickson said, well, I'll tell you what, tonight what I want you to do is put your chair in front of the mirror in your hotel room and just stare at your eyes. And the guy goes back the next day. We started about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he said it didn't work. Erickson said, well, what happened? He said, well, I put my chair in front of the mirror last night at 11 o'clock. This morning at 8 o'clock, I got up, got dressed, came here, and nothing happened. And he looked very refreshed and rested, and in a pretty good mood, and he actually said something like, well, maybe tonight you can be equally unsuccessful. Now, somewhere in between these two are workshop of the mind techniques. When I was going through training, they did an interesting process with each of us where we were hypnotized and then told to construct, nail by nail, a workshop of the mind. To pick a setting where you wanted to have it and build it, whatever way you wanted to build it. And using time distortion, go through each step of building it. So I can remember sawing the wood and hammering it and painting it and putting it together and building this workshop in this wonderful idyllic setting. Very strange, too. The setting, years later, I opened up an old National Geographic magazine that I didn't know I'd ever seen, but I apparently had, and there was the picture of my scene, a beautiful valley in the Swiss Alps. So my workshop is this house-like structure with wonderful windows that opens up on this valley. And let me just describe my workshop to you to give you an idea of how you might want to construct one. I go down 13 steps to get there. I go into my trance, I go down 13 steps to get there, and then I find myself at the front door. 13 isn't a magic number, by the way. Underneath the workshop is a storage area that by definition has all the materials I'll ever need. So if I'm in the workshop and I need something, I can always find it downstairs. In the workshop, as you walk in, it's sort of divided into two sections. There's a little hallway kind of thing, and then over here next to the windows is a big control panel with computer consoles and videotape and all this stuff, and wonderful window and video monitors. To the left of that is an elevator with a light above it, and then over here on the left end of the side of this aisle is a bookcase with, by definition, all the books I've ever read. Next to that's an easy chair, and then over here is kind of an art studio that has a forge and a kiln and paints and all kinds of art supplies. Now, let me just give you some examples of how I use it. if I have to take a test of some sort and I don't remember what it is that I know, I will punch it up on the computer and wait for something to come up on the video screen. Oftentimes it's the face of the instructor saying what I don't remember. Now, the elevator shaft is interesting. I take a problem, I put it in the elevator and send it down. And it stays there. And I can leave it there, come back out of the trance, and when the light above the elevator goes on, it's time to go back into the workshop and let the doors open, and there's usually somebody or something there that will tell me what I need to know. The longest a problem ever stayed in this elevator was 8 years. I had a dream, and this is now years ago, I had a dream I didn't understand. It was a repetitive dream. And so I said to the elevator, I want to put the dream in the elevator, send it down, and I want some help understanding the dream. 8 years later, the light went on. Now, it had gone on a few times, since. And the doors open, and there was my mother. And my mother comes out of the elevator and tells me the meaning of my dream, which had a lot to do with her, by the way. And that when I knew instantaneously it was an answer to this question that I had posed 8 years before. So one of the principles is, don't rush your unconscious. It takes its own damn good time. Okay. I oftentimes think of the relationship of the conscious mind to the unconscious mind as analogous to the relationship between the symphony orchestra conductor and the orchestra. And if you think in terms of information processing, it's true. If the symphony orchestra conductor is going to play 140 instruments, the only way he or she could do it would be to play them one at a time. But the orchestra can play them simultaneously, so we get the difference between this linear processing mode and the circular processing mode. You need both. The orchestra without the conductor is just a hodgepodge of sounds, but the conductor without the orchestra is silence. So you need both. I'm digressing here, but a number of so-called Ericksonian approaches really de-emphasize the value of the conscious mind, that it's somehow bad or whatever. You don't believe that, because it's a synergy between the conscious and the unconscious. You need both. But what the conscious mind does is say to the unconscious, this is the piece of music I want to play. Now you play it. Okay? The conscious mind can't play the music and simply say, here's the sheet, and you play it. If you attempt to speed it up or slow it down, perhaps it won't play as sweetly as it might. So I think of that kind of relationship. So give it time to respond. In heterohypnosis and working with other people, also give them adequate time to respond. Responses are a little slower in hypnosis than they might be in the waking state. Give a person time to come up with something to say to you if you're asking them something, or time for a response to take place, because it takes time. The bookcases I've not been able to make good use of. I have had clients, however, who are exceptional people, who literally could go to the bookcase, take down a book, and read it. I used to do a demonstration where I would have a confederate, and it would usually be a well-rehearsed subject. There was a couple that I used who were able to do this, who could take these books down. I'd hypnotize them before a workshop, like the day before the workshop, give them a post-hypnotic suggestion. On the day of the workshop, they would go there, go back into a somnambulistic trance, but act as though they were wide awake. Then I would bring the person to the front of the room, sit them down in a chair with the audience there, and say, okay, I'm going to hypnotize this person in a minute. And of course, they didn't know she was already hypnotized. As I do that, I want you to notice the changes that occur in her. So let's get some baseline data. Let's just describe what you see in her. What does she look like? What is she doing? And I start writing this on the board. And then very dramatically, I used to say, but you've not noticed something else. And I would turn to her and say to the audience, what you haven't noticed is the book in her lap. And she would look down, of course, start to hallucinate the book, and say, would you please open it up to page 42 and read it? She'd open it up, or whatever page, she'd open it up and start reading the book that she'd actually read. And I've seen a fair number of people be able to do this. I'm still working at being able to do it. I'm not able to yet. Maybe you'll be able to. So what I do instead, if I want to get some sense of some knowledge that I've read and don't remember, I just kind of go over to the bookcase and kind of put my hands on the book and kind of let that remind me like an anchor of what it was that I learned. I'm not able to read the books yet. In self-hypnosis, I sometimes make an analogy for my clients that I call the scales analogy. If we say that the scale consists of negative forces and positive forces, then a problem is the case of the scales being tipped toward the negative, at least in this analogy. Now, there's a couple different ways to proceed to get the scales tipped to the positive side. One would be to add, so to speak, weight on this side of the scales to tip it. The other one would be to remove weight from the negative side. In self-hypnosis, you can do both. You can remove weight, so to speak, or add weight, so to speak. Adding weight would be positive affirmations, imagery, maybe even internal advisor kind of approach. Removing it would be the process of dehypnotizing yourself, redeciding old messages. No, you don't have to keep cleaning your plate. Yes, you aren't dumb about mathematics just because you're female. You know, all those crazy messages we got growing up. No, you don't need to listen to other people's renditions of who they think you are because that's about them, not about you. Okay, those would be examples of taking the negative weight off. Now, I tell people that when they're first starting a self-hypnosis program, just start on the positive side. Don't start doing self-analysis as your first step, because your unconscious is going to say, wait a minute, where have you been all these years? All of a sudden you're going in there, want to tell me, your unconscious, how to do things, and most unconscious will be kind of afraid of that approach. It's like when you teach people the pendulum technique or the ideomotor technique, the first thing they go in is, they don't go in gingerly, they go in looking for pay dirt. Was I abused at the age of 3? You know, and the finger just sits there, says, the hell with you, you know, I mean, where have you been all these years, and now you're going to come in here and try and boss me around? You know, 7% of your mind telling 93% of your mind what to do? Well, forget it, it's not going to work. So I tell them, start on the positive side, start with small steps. Don't start with the major problem in your life, unless you happen to be particularly gifted at this. Start with something simple. And start with one thing at once. Another analogy I make is, if you imagine a graph of progress, and you were working on 5 different areas in your life, and you did 10 units of effort, okay? Then if we distribute those 10 units of effort over those 5 areas, none of them would have too much progress. But if you put 10 units of effort into one of those areas, then you would notice the progress. And nothing succeeds like success. You sort of build your own yes set. Oh, well, I wasn't biting my nails this week, or I slept a little better this week. Maybe I can begin to work on my habits or on my self-image, or, you know, something perhaps even more major. So start simple and concentrate on 1, maybe 2 areas at once. The other thing is, in people's expectation, even when you're trained, you'll have this expectation, because we tend to associate instantaneous results with this idea of hypnosis, right? Why do you want to do it through hypnosis? Because it's fast, right? Well, let me tell you why that may get you in trouble. Let's just say, for the sake of it, that over here we had 1,000 units of negativity when we started. And for the sake of it, say we had 5 units of positive over here. So 1,000 pieces saying you can't lose weight, or you got to keep smoking, or, you know, whatever it is, can't sleep at night. And 5 over here saying that you can. Well, if, to use the analogy, if you put in 994 units of effort over here, it's a lot of work, the scales wouldn't tip. Now what happens is, well before people get to 994, usually about 3 or 4, they say it's not working. Now that's far more powerful suggestion than the 5 units of effort perhaps you put in. It's not working, it's not going to work, you see yourself in the future reinforcing the problem, and guess what? It gets worse, not better. Okay? So give it time and realize that tomorrow may be that 995th unit of effort, and then the scales will begin to tip. You have to put in some baseline work before it'll happen. Are you with me? And this is a mistake that many, many people make in the use of self-hypnosis. For that matter, in the use of hetero-hypnosis, where they come in and say, well, gee, I came to see you yesterday, and today I'm still eating, I'm still overeating, I'm still smoking, I'm still anxious, and I don't like myself. What's wrong? You know. At a point where you start to begin to feel some effort, you start to begin to feel some results rather, then you might begin to look over here. And it may be that by then your unconscious is already signaling you about that through dreams, slips of the tongue, images, flashbacks, whatever, to say, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. Or, going back to the continuum, once you start feeling something happening, then you may go in and say, tell me what else I need to pay attention to. Or using Figner signaling, for example, you may ask, is there something else here that needs attention? Is there something from my past I need to look at? Is there something I'm forgetting about? If I continue to do the same, will it solve the problem? And usually the unconscious will be fairly forthright about that. Now, it may tell you there's something else you need to look at, but you're not ready to look at it. That'll happen. Maybe you need to build ego strength in order to be able to tolerate it. That will happen. More utilizations would be to write out a description of yourself the way you want to be in the problem area. And change it and edit it until it's exactly the way you want it to be. Ask yourself, if I were to step into a machine that would make me like this description exactly, would I be comfortable with it? Or would I want to change some part of it? So keep editing it until you got it to where you want it. Then there's two ways to proceed. One is to leave it in that form, or to begin to compress it. Take 3 paragraphs, make them into a paragraph. Take that 1 paragraph then, make it into a sentence. Take the sentence, make it into a phrase, make the phrase into a word. Okay? For me, for example, all of my self-hypnotic programming to quit smoking is now condensed. And I wrote pages of descriptions, by the way, in my journal. But my phrase now is healthy and fit. And when I think healthy and fit, it even causes me to take a deep breath. It's just a program that's in there. And all of the learnings about non-smoking are accessed that way for me. But this came from pages and pages of description of how I want it to be, athletically and every other way. Okay? Then what you do with it is, if we're in more toward the non-directive, is just write it down on a piece of paper, wad it up in your hand, go into a trance and say, I want some help becoming this. And just hang out. Your experience will range from the experience of nothing happening to images presenting themselves, to voices saying, well, you need to consider this, to flashbacks to other times, to whatever. One of the things that happened to me when I was doing my non-smoking programming was I realized one of the psychodynamics of smoking for me. I went back in my trance to remembering being a kid, watching my mother smoke. And I remembered something I hadn't remembered in years. When I was a kid, I sent her a note, I think I was 9 years old, that had a skull and crossbones on it saying, please stop smoking. I hadn't remembered that. And I realized as I talked to that kid inside of me that he thought if he smoked, he would show her what she was doing to herself and she would stop. So I had good talking to the kid and said, well, by this point, by the way, she had died from smoking. So it didn't work. I said, you've got to stop doing that. And he agreed. So that's what happened for me when I took that piece of paper, simply went in and said, help me realize this. Okay? The imagery and rehearsal, which is, well known, where you simply get in there and practice something, and practice it until you become confused about what you're doing is thinking into the future or remembering the past. That's a very good suggestion for rehearsal. Even when I do that with other people, you're going to see yourself doing it over and over and over again until you become confused about whether you're seeing into the future or remembering yourself actually having done it in the past. Pseudo-orientation in time, where you would tell yourself, for example, it's a year after you solved the problem, and then through a series of scenes is to see yourself working backwards from that point. I do that a lot in heterohypnosis settings where we take people past the point of the problem and work backwards, especially at impasse points in therapy where you say, it's a year after the problem now, and how did you get there? What did we do? How did you handle the relapses, etc.? How did we get through the impasse? And they'll tell you, in most cases. And then if we go back to the scales analogy, I want to give you a couple of techniques for the negative side. Most of these are about adding things to the positive side so far. But I want to give you a couple techniques for removing from the negative side. I guess dream induction could be one of those. Redecision work, where you go back on it, where you ask yourself to remind yourself of a time in which you made a certain decision that is the current day problem. For example, let's just say the issue is fear of intimacy. And you say, every time I get close to a relationship, I panic. by the way, if you're not ready to remember the stuff from the past, you won't, but it always pays to proceed with extreme deference to your unconscious by saying things like, if it's okay for me to remember, and really give it permission, although it's going to do it anyway, but give it permission to proceed at its own pace. If it's okay for me to remember, I would like to remember some times from my past that were the basis for this decision about intimacy, or contribute to it, or are analogous to it, or words like that. And then you see, perhaps a relationship with a parent in which you develop those kind of patterns, and then you would do what I refer to as a redecision program. You would, for example, dialogue with you at that age and say things from your adult understandings that little one may not know, such as, well, when your father told you that you were good for nothing, well, that isn't true about you. He was angry that day, or he was jealous, or, he was threatened by your meeting boys, or, whatever it was, and help that little one to re-understand. Then there's a step you can add to that where, once you have the understanding corrected in the past, then ask yourself to remember a series of images after that, taking into account this new learning. So you sort of install it in the past, and then it tends to affect the history from that point onward. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. That would be a removing negative technique. Now, that would be what we refer to as an idiosensory technique, where you go into internal imagery. Well, you can also use the pendulum or finger signals to get similar information. Why don't we just do this for a minute? I think this would be fun. Let's do finger signaling, because that could be useful. Or pendulum, either way. I'm going to give you two different approaches to programming these idiomotor finger signals, and you can identify with one or the other as being a useful motivational strategy for you. One is that you tell yourself which finger is going to be yes, which finger is going to be no, etc. If you don't like being bossed around, and if your unconscious and especially doesn't like to be bossed around, then perhaps you can have your unconscious tell you. Okay? It would be something like, what I'm saying to myself is, I'm going to relax a little bit now, let my peripheral vision shrink, let my arms relax. This is something you can't do consciously, by the way. If you're attempting to do this and it's not working, ask yourself, am I breathing? Chances are, if you're not breathing, you're trying too hard. Like, okay. And it takes no physical effort, so you shouldn't be sweating either. It's more of allowing it to happen instead of trying to make it happen. And here's what I've seen more than once, in fact, many times in teaching this technique in self-hypnosis courses. I'll see someone so intent on this hand that the finger on the other hand lifts. It's like the unconscious says, I'll trick you, you can't get in my way, I'll do it anyway. So you might watch for that kind of thing. Also, if it will help you to be less consciously oriented in doing this, then you might just give yourself suggestions for dissociating the arm. Feeling farther away from the arm, or feeling like the arm's somehow disconnected, or numb and tingling, something that will sort of get you away from it. The idea is to ask for something and wait for its response, as opposed to trying to figure it out. In idiosensory techniques, rather than you say to a client, go inside and get an answer. Some clients will go in and try and figure it out. That's not what you want. And what I want you to do is go inside and wait for an answer. Okay? Now, one of the ways to jam them, to keep them from trying to figure the answer out, is to tell them to just continue to repeat the question over and over. If they're repeating the question, it's pretty hard for them to be thinking about the answer. Okay? And you can do the same thing with the finger signal. So, let me show you how I might program it at first. And there's a variety of approaches to this. If I was going to tell myself what the yes finger is, I might say, okay, I would like for the index finger on my right hand to be the yes finger. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that finger and I'm going to move it around. And as I'm moving it around, I'm thinking the word yes. I'm getting a feeling of what yes is. And I'm actually seeing it written and saying it over and over to myself. Yes, this is now my yes finger. Okay? And I'm going to ask that my right thumb be my no finger. And so I'm going to move my thumb so I have the sensation of it moving, and I'm going to think the word no and get a feeling of no, see it written, say the word no over and over and over again. Now, disregarding this hand, I want my unconscious mind to simply let the yes finger move. Now, it's not quite the same kind of amplitude of response I get on the other one because the other one's more rehearsed, but there it is. All right, thank you. And do thank your unconscious. Do recognize its efforts on your behalf. Because what we normally do is we beat our unconsciouses up, right? You miss a tennis shot, what do you say? You idiot! Well, who are you talking to? All right. Now I'd like my unconscious mind, for just the purpose of today, to move the no finger on my right hand. There it is. Not quite as much. Oh, there it went. Now, by the way, it won't always be this amplitude. It won't always be so pronounced. So what you need to do then is look at the back of your hand and watch the tendons. Oftentimes those tendons will lift before the finger actually moves. And that's fine. Or for that matter, you may not even see anything at all, but you'll feel some potential energy there, something building up, or a tingling sensation. As long as it's distinguishable, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay? Now that would be a way of programming it directly. Well, this one's already set up, so let me do this one. I might proceed this way. I would like for my unconscious mind to indicate to me a finger on, and you might even say both hands, but in this case a finger on my left hand that will be the yes, very good, the yes finger. He's close by. Thank you. And now I would like for my unconscious mind to please indicate which of the fingers on the left hand it would like to be the no finger. There it is. Okay, and then those are the ones that I've had programmed, so it's already there. But that would be a way, perhaps more permissively, of proceeding. Now, we can do the same thing with a pendulum. Can I borrow somebody's pendulum again? Yeah, thanks. By the way, you want a yes finger, a no finger, preferably two other ones as well. And I don't know, and I don't want to tell you. This is out of respect for your unconscious mind. Clearly, if there's something you don't know, you want to know that. And if there's something that your unconscious mind doesn't think you're ready to know, you want to know that as well. There are other options for that. Instead of programming two other fingers, one of the things you can do is you can have the yes and no finger be answer in those ways as well. For example, no finger moving might mean, neither finger moving might mean, I don't know. Both fingers moving might mean, I don't want to tell you. Now, you will sometimes get equivocal responses. You'll get yes and no. And it has to do with the structure of your question. Okay, for example, if you say, is my nervousness due to X? And you get yes and no. Well, it may mean yes in part, or it may mean not completely, or it used to be, or it could be, or whatever. So you need to begin to refine it at that point. You might say, are there other factors that contribute to it as well? And maybe you get a yes, and then that begins to clarify the response, sort of a detective kind of thing. And then keep in mind that as you proceed with this, you can tie idiomotor into idiosensory, where my unconscious might be willing to give me an image of thus and such. If the yes finger moves, close your eyes, pay attention. You can do the same thing with your clients across the interpersonally, to ask them the same thing. Would your unconscious mind be willing to answer a series of questions? Yes. About such and such. Is such and such a factor in the present day difficulty? The answer is yes. Would the unconscious mind be willing to give you an image which would show you how it impacts your daily behavior? Or would it give you an image of what you need to do to be done with that old script or whatever? Yes finger lifts, you say to the client, okay, close your eyes, tell me whatever comes into your mind. And then there'll be something there generally. We can do the same thing with the pendulum. The pendulum has 4 degrees of freedom. It can move clockwise, counterclockwise, backwards and forwards, and left and right. And it's the same kind of thing. I can't... Actually, this is programming, but I don't remember what they are, so let's just find out. Yeah, now, have the elbow supported and have the hand like this so that the arm can move. And again, there's nothing hocus pocus about this. The arm obviously has to influence the pendulum, but it's that idiomotor influence, like pushing your foot unconsciously on the brakes. I really don't remember what mine are. Let's find out. Okay, what I'm going to do is ask my unconscious mind to indicate which way is yes. Oh. Clockwise. Now it's interesting. It's starting to go clockwise, and I'm already ahead of myself thinking no, so it's trying not to do it. So now I'm thinking no. Counterclockwise. Now, once again, 2 different approaches here. You can program it Or you can ask for the response. If you don't like to be bossed around, ask for the response. If you like that kind of structure, tell yourself what to do. I used to teach this. I just would bring string and washers, and we'd make them out of those. Let's take a second, try it. Just do it. See what happens. I want to remind you the value of staying in your sensory experience with this. You remember my story about the man who had the carbon tetrachloride thrown in his face? And I kept washing his fingers, and his face would grimace, and his fingers wouldn't move. I had a person in a self-hypnosis course once saying, I can't get my fingers to move. Every time I ask for the yes finger to move, I hear this voice in my head saying, yes. And every time I ask the no finger to move, I hear this voice saying, no. And so he didn't get finger responses ever, but he got idiosensory voices. And so that's another way of doing it. I think it's actually probably a little better way of doing it. So you can play with that. Now, a few years ago, George Kreskin, you know Kreskin, the amazing Kreskin, who disappeared, I guess it was in the late 50s or early 60s. He was a hypnotherapist, well-known hypnotherapist, disappeared for a few years, came back with a nose job, and was the amazing Kreskin, and has an interesting mentalist act. He marketed something called Kreskin's Crystal. It's a little lucite block and a little lucite ball on a chain. And on one side of the block it has arrows that says yes, no. And on the other side of the block it says buy and sell. Now, let me caution you about that. If we don't add some sort of psychic paradigm to this, you can't predict the stock market this way. So be careful about that. What you can bring up, at least for our purposes here, what you can bring out is what you have inside. If you don't know it, you don't know it. Okay, and I'm barring the possibility that there are other ways of knowing than through sensory experience, at least for our purposes here today. Let's talk a little bit about inductions. I'm a minimalist about self-hypnosis inductions. I think the less the better, frankly. I think one of the best inductions is to simply close your eyes, go inside, and ask for an advisor and talk to an internal part of you. One of the ways to deal with so-called hypnotic resistance, by the way, is to talk to a part inside that can help you understand your so-called resistance. May I speak with a part of me that can explain to me my difficulty in letting go of control, or however you frame it. If you can get that part, guess what? You're there. It's a trick. Okay? So if you can find some internal voice to dialogue, you don't need to do an induction. You really don't. All right? You can say to that voice, are you willing to accept the following suggestion? Yes or no? Well, no, I'm not. Well, if I changed it in the following ways, would you be willing to accept the suggestion? Yes. If you say this, I'm willing to accept the suggestion. That's it. That's all you have to do. So you can do a very minimalist induction. But if you want more of an induction, you can do virtually any heterohypnosis induction can be adapted to auto-hypnosis. For example, a progressive relaxation induction, an imagery induction. Now, let me give you a little hint about an induction that will probably work best for you. How many of you remember the strategy you used as a kid to go to sleep when you were having difficulty going to sleep? Mine was I would imagine I would be in the bottom of a rowboat, covered up with blankets, snug and warm, floating down a river. And by the time I would go a bit, I would forget about it. The implication is that because those worked for you, and they worked at that early age, they're probably still hardwired in there. And you may want to elicit those and use those again as your auto-hypnotic induction. Also, in doing heterohypnosis with client, you may ask the client to tell you what were their strategies for helping themselves to go to sleep as a kid. And then instead of having them go all the way to sleep, sort of stop it before they get there, and that's hypnosis. And that's a valuable way of finding out people's hypnotic strategies and your own. So if you can remember that, that may be a way of doing self-hypnosis for each of you. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Intuitively? Fred Morris has a technique that I'm going to give you in slightly adapted form that she wrote a book called Self-Hypnosis in 2 Days, which is an interesting little book. If you do what she tells you to do, and let me explain what 2 days is. And it sounds kind of miraculous, right? But it's 2 days. It's like you lock yourself in a room for 8 hours on 2 separate days and do her program. And if you do it, the people that I've at least given the assignment to that have done it, it works pretty well. And let me give you a modified version of it. It's basically post-Ericksonian in that it's a utilization strategy with self. What you do is you start out with some generalized pattern. In a moment, my eyes are going to get heavy, I'm going to relax, or something like that. As you say those words, you say them into a tape recorder. As you respond to the words and start to go, you go to a certain point, and then tell yourself to come back out, turn the tape recorder on at the point that you left off, and describe your experience into the tape recorder. For example, let me just do it. I'm telling myself to feel heavy and relaxed, and my head's going to come forward. All right? Now I'm responding to that. And I'm coming back, and then I talk into the tape recorder. As my head began to come forward, my eyes began to flutter. But I would say it, as your head comes forward, your eyes begin to flutter, and then I felt my shoulders coming down, and you feel your shoulders coming down. Back the tape recorder up to the beginning, play it through to that point, find yourself responding. Bring yourself back again, go to where you left off on the tape, describe your experience at that point, back onto the tape. And you see how you construct an induction for yourself that's personalized. That's a nice technique. You can make tape recordings using any of the standard inductions. What I suggest you do, a lot of people are very self-conscious about listening to their own voices. So there's a couple of strategies for getting past that. One of the strategies is to make the worst sounding tape you can possibly make and criticize the hell out of it as much as you can and get that out of your system. And then make a tape you can listen to. Okay? Or have it done in someone else's voice. You write it out and have someone else record it whose voice you like. Okay? You want to get past the point where you critique your own voice. That's another way of doing it. I do that. Well, actually, I haven't done it much, but I've done it, lately, but I've done it a lot in the past. I have a whole stack of tapes of various things I made for myself. And that was one of my favorite techniques. One of the nice things about that is you don't have to bring that conscious mind back to do a lot of work. You can sort of turn it over to the tape recorder and just lay back, and the tape recorder will guide you. Now, the disadvantage to the tape recording is the same disadvantage in using it in heterohypnosis, in buying someone else's tapes, is that it's not responsive to what's happening in the moment. You can't decide to go a different direction. I suppose you could and turn it off or something like that, but it tends to be limiting in that way. Again, I want to refer back to the twilight state of sleep. That's where I do most of my self-hypnosis these days, as I'm drifting off into sleep at night. I just piggyback on the natural trance that occurs. The mirror staring and dialoguing that I've described in a couple of different ways, I think is an excellent technique. There's the so-called Betty Erickson technique. Milton Erickson's wife perfected this one, where she would make a series of pacing statements about herself in various sensory modalities. I'll demonstrate it in a moment, and then make some leading statements and eventually go to an arm levitation. She would, for example, make 3 visual pacing statements. She'd be sitting there, say to herself something like, as I'm sitting here, I'm staring straight ahead, and I'm noticing the pattern on the wall in the back of the room. In my peripheral vision, I'm noticing heads moving, and I'm noticing the person operating the camera moving. And then she'd make a series, perhaps, of auditory pacing statements, and I'm hearing the ruffling sound of papers, and I'm hearing more ruffling sound of papers, and I'm hearing the buzz from the lights. And then she would make perhaps a series of kinesthetic statements, and I'm feeling the feeling of the chair beneath me, I'm feeling my eyelids growing heavier, and I'm feeling my mouth becoming heavier and being harder to move. And then what she would do is she would make 2 statements in each of those modalities to pace herself. And then she would begin to give herself leading statements. She would then ask herself of her 2 hands which one was feeling lightest, and then she would begin to suggest an arm levitation to herself, again in a pace lead kind of way. And as I'm sitting here noticing all these things and my eyes growing heavier, my left hand is getting lighter, and so forth. Dream programming. As long as I'm talking about dreams, let me also talk about them in a heterohypnosis context, because in that context, I want to tell you about some of my clients' dreams and how they were useful to them and how they were programmed hypnotically. And I'll mention those in just a moment. You can order up a dream. How many of you do this? It's kind of a common thing, I find, even people that aren't trained. Order it up. Just say, I want to have a dream about this. It'll help me understand it better. It's that simple. Now, in terms of inductions, one of the best induction, and I'll speak about this more specifically in a moment, is the use of the twilight state of sleep. When you go to sleep at night, you go through that twilight state of sleep. Now, How many of you have had the experience in the morning of waking up a fraction of a second before your alarm clock? Okay. Most of us do that. It isn't the alarm clock that wakes you. You know what wakes you? It's the suggestion you give yourself at night when you set it. That's what wakes you. And we did some experiments once where we had roommates unplug alarm clocks for roommates, and they would still wake up, thinking that they were going to wake up, wondering why the alarm clock didn't go off. You all do this. You all set your biological clocks like this. We have very accurate biological clocks. So using that twilight state, you don't have to do an induction. Just go in there, get nice and relaxed, get good and comfortable, forget about your body, drift, and then program your day. Now, you do this anyway. How many of you have ever had the experience of following this post-hypnotic suggestion? Tomorrow's going to be a shitty day. And it was. Okay, it works. It works. Okay? So one of the naturalistic inductions to use is when you're lying in bed at night. As you're lying in bed at night, tell yourself, I'm going to have a dream. It'll be a dream about thus and such. I'll remember the dream when my unconscious mind says I'm ready to remember it. It may not be the next day. It could be 10 years later. But you'll know it. Okay. Usually it's fairly quick. Usually it's within a day or two, in my experience. When the dream comes to you, then you can go back inside, ask for help in interpreting the dream. Once you've had the dream, maybe it'll make sense to you, maybe it won't. You can go back into a trance and ask yourself for help in understanding it. You can ask for help with each individual image. You can also rewrite your dreams. You can have dreams come out differently. You can have dreams with different casts of characters. One man had a dream. He's at the racetrack, and he wants to approach a horse that's in a stall. But the gate to the stall is closed, and standing before the gate is a rather fierce-looking trainer saying, you can't get close to her. You can't get close to her. And that was the dream. And we've been working on some of his family of origin relationships. Well, he was told to have the same dream again, but with a different cast of characters. Well, the horse became mother, the trainer became father, and the gate became the siblings. And he was isolated from mother. All the siblings had a better relationship with mother. He was considered the black sheep, and mother had, we're not even sure if she was alcoholic or sick or whatever, but mother was sickly a lot. And father would always say to this boy, don't disturb your mother. And all he wanted to do was talk to her. Don't disturb your mother. Stay away from your mother. So suddenly he saw who the images in the dream were. Let me give you some other examples from other clients. A woman came to see me who had gone through a stormy breakup of a relationship. Very together woman, very intact, very functional, very accomplished, but this was a very difficult breakup for her and was feeling very bad and depressed. Didn't really want psychotherapy, but thought she better have some help. She was being experiencing sleeplessness, some free-floating anxiety, and was kind of messing with her life, so she thought she'd go do therapy. But when she got there, it was kind of a double bind. I want your help, but I really don't want to be in therapy. And it turns out her fear of the therapy was that she would become dependent. And she had some misconceptions of what therapy was, but that was her fear. So it was almost like if she took my help, she felt that she would become dependent on me. So she was willing to be hypnotized. I hypnotized her and said, you'll have a dream which will explain the present difficulty. In the dream, she's in a little boat in the middle of the ocean, doing just fine, rowing across the ocean with all the provisions she needs and doing just great. But a storm comes up, a whirlwind of a storm, and comes closer to her, and the waves are getting bigger, and she's rowing away, and as she wakes up from the dream, she's just about to capsize. Okay. That was the dream. Then I was told her to go back in and have a dream which would depict not only the problem that would resolve the difficulties of therapy. This dream was the same dream initially. She's in a little boat, doing just fine. Storm comes up. It's a whirlwind of a storm. The boat starts going like this, and she's looking around, and way in the distance she sees a little island with a dock. She says to herself in the dream, I could just tie up with the dock for a little while. And she does this in the dream. She gets over the dock, ties up for a little while, just until the storm passes, and then is on her merry way. Well, you hear the pun. Okay, that was about tying up with the therapist for just a little while, just until the storm passes. She didn't even get that at first, but felt a sense of relief about working with me. If I remember correctly, she came in a subsequent session and says, I think I know what that dream means. Sometimes we don't want to take a dream and translate it into conscious mind language. Sometimes the dream is better left in unconscious mind language. Let me give you a case in point. This was a woman who was at the time 62 years old, had been a librarian for 40 years, and hated it for about 39 of those 40 years, and had never married, had no remaining family, and was in many ways all alone in the world. She was told to have a dream which would depict her present-day circumstances, and the dream she had was she's in a train going through a mountain pass, and it's lovely scenery, and things pass by, some things she kind of recognizes, and some new things that are interesting, but then the train starts to pick up speed. It goes faster, and she says to herself, oh my God, I'm going to crash. And I've got to do something, but I can't do anything. What can I do? And then inevitably in the dream, she either wakes up before the crash or it crashes and she feels terribly injured. This was her dream. All right. Then I induced a dream. I said, you're going to have the same dream, but with a better ending that will resolve your difficulty. All right. So in this dream, she's again in the train's going through the mountain pass, it picks up speed, and she says the same thing, oh my God, it's going to crash, I have to do something. In this dream, she says, well, I guess I'm going to have to try and drive the damn thing. So she runs to the front of the train, and here's all these controls, and she's looking at them thinking, well, I've got to try something. So she starts monkeying with levers and all this, and finally gets a hold of the train, and the symbolism, and you reminded me of this, symbolism is wonderful. She comes to a Y in the track and says, I think I'll take a different track. Takes a different track and goes off in her merry way, driving the train. Within a month, she'd resigned her job, she'd become a world traveler, a championship pool player, and joined the Recorder Society. She's now 71 years old. I just saw her again the other day. As a matter of fact, she came in for some minor problem. She's doing great, doing all these things, traveling around the world, and she was doing wonderfully. Now, the point that I made before was sometimes a dream is best left untranslated. We all have our interpretation of that dream, right? I never gave her an interpretation. She never gave me an interpretation. I simply told her she'd find some way to incorporate the value of the dream into her life. And she then self-selected these changes. So sometimes you don't translate it. This was a woman who had abuse issues. It was one of my earliest cases, so it was fairly experimental. And she had a series of dreams, a repetitive series of dreams, before she came to see me, of dirty laundry. Well, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to. But the dirty laundry was very interesting. It was lines and lines of laundry. And what she noticed primarily about it was not only was it dirty, hanging out to dry, unclean, but that it was her father's laundry and her laundry intermingled. And his socks, and notably his underwear, and that sort of thing. Well, our therapy, which was 6 months long, consisted, and I'm not sure how I feel about this today, although she seemed to be very functional when she left, because she never did tell her story, in my way of thinking now, but and I never knew what her story was, for that matter. But in our hypnotic work, all we did was manipulate these images. Well, once you take the laundry down, so she'd take the laundry down in a dream, hypnotically induced dream, and then I stopped suggesting what she should do and simply said, you make the next move, in essence. You have a dream, which is the next step. Well, the next step, she went through a series of steps. The next step was separating out her dirty laundry from her father's dirty laundry. Then she decides she wants to wash her laundry. As she starts washing her laundry, she says, well, I better wash my father's laundry. And then she says, no, wait a minute. I don't need to wash my father's laundry. That's his. So she separates it out, puts it in a basket, sets it off to the side, washes her laundry, hangs it up to dry. It's all white and clean and fresh. Takes it down, folds it up, puts it away. And about that time, she decided it was time to terminate therapy. And all of the symptoms were gone. I have no idea what her history was. I might do that case differently today, but that's what we did. And I never gave her an interpretation, nor did she give me an interpretation of what they meant. I remember once sitting in the back of a Volkswagen microbus coming back from a lecture. And this is one of those old ones that had a huge sunroof to it. The whole top of the thing goes back. And it was my stop. I was getting ready to leave, and I was hunched over like this talking to the driver. And after a while, my back started to hurt. And I said, I've really got to go. My back's hurting. He said, well, we're having a good conversation. Can't you stay a while longer? I said, yeah, but my back's hurting. He says, why don't you stand up? My response was, what do you mean? There's a roof. I looked up, realized there was no roof there at all. But it had held me as effectively as if it was a piece of metal. So we live in our frames of reference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.